kan wel een beetje nu begrijpen hoe dat zit. Ja.
Kan je dat dan ook met, als we zeg maar, wij dus allemaal hier ons mobiel uit zou zetten, zou je dat zeggen? Of staat dat te ver?
Dus dan stopt de feedback.
Ja, maar het geluid wordt dan wel allemaal net niet op hetzelfde moment gestuurd.
Oh, dat kan ik helemaal niet.
Die drukte, dat krijgt hij nog.
Het zou wel een leuke
Ik heb die software een keer in het tekst. Ik ken haar nog wat. Het viel me niks uit. Ik heb gewoon een regiekamer. Ik kan gewoon doorschuiven naar live, naar de partner. Met de mogelijk maken. Je kunt zo gek niet bedenken. Hetzelfde dat je die audio nu gewoon kunt horen wat in de zaal gebeurt.
Ja, want ik verwacht dat er een enigszins gerichte microfoon op zit.
Ja, hij is wel inderdaad richting één kant, maar hij pakt een hele hoop onliggend. Dat zorgt ook voor dat hij stream leeg gaat. Het enige waar ik het niet helemaal mee eens ben, is dat hij wat blikken gaat zetten.
Engels, hè?
Ja,
ja. Ja, dat kan.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, warm welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Yeah, this is really special. For me, there were always two names on sustainability when I was a student here. That was Professor Elena Cavagnaro. I think you know her.
Yeah.
And Professor Jan Rotmans. And now I've met both. And I would like you to meet Professor Jan Rotmans as well, with a warm applause.
Thank you very much. Welcome to all of you here and also at home. I've about half an hour talk. Be with me if you have any questions. I need to stand here. Okay. You want me to stand here?
Perfect.
Okay. Please let me know if you have questions or remarks. You can also spare them, no point at all. I always start with this one for more than 10 years. Perhaps you recognize this statement. We do not live in an era of change, but in a change of era. What it means is, we are part of a revolution. You and I, we are part of an evolutionary revolution. I call it a transition. There are so many things in so many different fields fundamentally changing that most people do not even realize, but they feel it deep down inside. These are special times. And we know it because there's a lot of turmoil worldwide. 2019 was the year of protest. We've never seen around in the world so many protests by millions of people because of climate change, because of social inequalities, because of racism, all kind of protests. But deep down, underneath, is this going on. Our systems, most of them we have built up since the 19th century, are dysfunctional. They have become dysfunctional because we changed as humans, the whole environment changed. So they did well for quite a long time, but since 30, 40 years, they are not performing in the way we would like them to be. And if you look at the economic system, we hardly recovered from the latest financial economic crisis in 2008. And now, let's say, Corona crisis is really impacting the economy. We are part of an ecological crisis. We are in the midst of a trust crisis, democratic crisis, and deep down inside the crisis in ourselves. I will show you the next couple of minutes. Corona crisis is not easy. It is a systemic crisis because it impacts profoundly our vital systems like the energy, food, mobility system, even the education system. That's the reason why we are here. But actually it is more or less a quarantine of our consumption pattern. I will show you in a minute. It has short-term benefits like less CO2, 30-40% less this year, but in the long run it might be a disadvantage. Okay, we might blame the Chinese and the Chinese markets for good reasons. I've been there as well. So what you see is we are in direct contact with the wild animals. Here you see the civet cats hanging. We slaughtered them, but the civet cats have been infected by other animals, and they carry a lot of viruses. They are fully resistant, but they carry these zoonoses, and they carry it on to our human beings, and that is a major source of spreading the virus. However, my statement has always been it could have emerged in the Netherlands as well. Because we have 17 million people, but we have 170 million animals for our food production. All kind of animals like chickens and cows, and 170 million. That is really pretty dramatic. So in every place where you pack together so many animals close to each other with so many people, you carry over those zoonoses, and we have seen that over the last 30 years. We have been confronted with the Q fever, and let's say with BSE, with dozens of animal diseases which are dangerous to us. Globally, there are about 1.7 million zoonoses like COVID-19, 1.7 million. And a few hundreds of them are harmful to us human beings, and we don't even know which ones are. But my point is, the deepest cause of this crisis is the way we deal with nature and the way we deal with wild animals. So it's deep down in ourselves. We feel superior to nature, we feel we have the right to damage nature, and nature now strikes back. It's as logic as you can imagine. So if we do not restore the imbalance, and we should strive for a more balanced way of dealing with nature and wild animals, then if we do not do that, then we are running into big trouble. I showed earlier this morning, let's say, a big mine in Congo, in Africa, where we are digging to cobalt. Cobalt is one of the minerals that we are using in our iPhones, and we need to have lots of that cobalt. And we are digging in natural areas where we do not belong, and that's the area where the wild animals are carrying over these zoonoses. So there is a relation between your smartphone, let's say, and the zoonoses as well. So if we do not really change our behavior in the most fundamental way, we are heading for another COVID type of crisis. It might be COVID-20 or 21 or whatever, because we knew that there was a pandemic on its way. 10 years ago, experts warned for it. 5 years ago, it has been a part of our safety strategy, and it was ignored. It was ignored because we ignore these events which have a small occurrence but a potentially high impact. This is part of the ecological crisis that we are facing, and we need to be honest about this. We are in the midst of what we call an Anthropocene. Anthropocene means for the very first time in history, billions of years, we are facing the impact of human activities. And examples are climate change, loss of biodiversity, the plastic soup. But we borrow from the earth, we borrow resources, and we do not pay back. Well, you all know, if you borrow, but you don't pay back, you are running into a crisis. And we do that. And if you explain that in financial terms, it would add to 35% of what we are all gaining together. So we destroy our nature. This is from the most recent report produced by the IGBP, the UN panel on biodiversity. You see 1 million animal species are threatened now. main causes are the expansion of agriculture and the urbanization. You see it grew by 300% over the last 50 years and doubling since 1992. So 3/4 of the earth and 2/3 of the ocean we are now polluting. That's quite an achievement. That's quite an, if it wouldn't be so tragic, we could be proud of it, but this is pretty dramatic, that we have realized it in about 200 years. This is a famous colleague of mine. If there would be a Nobel Prize for the environment, he would have won it. Bob Watson, Professor Bob Watson. He was the founder of the so-called stratospheric ozone agreement. He was also one of the founders of climate change research, and he is saying, he's now working in the field of biodiversity loss, which is even more important, he's thinking, than climate change. But anyway, he is thinking we are destroying not so much nature, but we are destroying ourselves. Because nature delivers us the ecosystem services based upon which we can live on this planet. If you think about our food, our energy, our water, it all comes from our natural ecosystems. So you might think, well, a few degrees more. When I started my career 35 years ago, I did research into climate change. I developed the very first integrated climate change model, which is still being further developed at RIVM, the image model. And I was totally ignored. And I did my PhD on it 30 years ago. I didn't get cum laude because my committee said this is fascinating research into perhaps a non-existing problem. In 30 years it might turn out that it is a non-existing problem. My gosh. So, even half a degree, the point is, if we should stick to the climate goals, that's globally 2 degrees Celsius, but preferably 1.5, there's already a remarkable difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees. You see that here. If we stay below 1.5 degrees, there's still ice at the North Pole. If we don't, there's no ice anymore at the North Pole. It's the difference between coral bleaching and coral dying. It's the difference between heat waves of 4 weeks or 8 weeks. That's tremendous. You should realize that during the last ice age, 10,000 years ago, it was on average 4 degrees colder than now. 4. And that makes the difference between ice-free and fully iced. So I went myself down to Antarctica, the South Pole, 3 years ago. I spoke with many polar researchers, and I was impressed by their knowledge, but also they were really scared. They were very emotional. They told me, Jan, what is happening here we cannot account for anymore. Our models cannot account for this. It's very strange what is happening here. First of all, I was impressed by the beauty. I took these ones with my iPhone 9 at that time. The bluer the ice, the older it is. Thousands of years old. This is magic. This is art. I was impressed by the beauty. I was impressed by the silence. I'm a guy from Rotterdam, always used to noise in the background. There's no noise. There's fully silence. But I was also impressed by the fragility of nature. It's the most fragile environment you can imagine. And I thought it would be an absolute shame if we would be destroying this natural capital. There are 3 dominant penguin species, and 2 of them are migrating to the coldest areas at the South Pole because it's getting too hot. 18 degrees we have measured at the fringes of the South Pole. It's unbelievable. At the center it's -40. So what is happening there is that at the fringes of the South Pole there are enormous blocks of ice calving off, deteriorating. And you must imagine these are blocks of ice at the size of a province of Fryslân. And slowly, but unmistakably, they are carving off from the big ice sheet. You see that here at the left picture, and that runs into the ocean. And if that is happening, you can hardly imagine what that would mean. If the whole South Pole would carve off and melt, the sea level rise would go up by 60 meters. But even this will cause a sea level rise of another meter or 2 meters for us. So what we see now, it goes much, much faster than we see naturally, 5 times faster than during the last 20, 30 years. It goes 500,000 times faster than millions of years ago. And we in the Netherlands might expect 1 meter, and in the next 100 years, and in the next few hundred years, 2, 3, 4 meters. That has profound implications for us. We need a Nile Delta plan, and we need to work on it right now. The current dikes can stand for the next 30 years, but if we develop a Nile Delta plan, it will cost us 30 years, so we need to start right now. I'm from Rotterdam. I was born at -6 NEP, but now, let's say, in 50, 100 years, we will go down to -8, -10, and that is pretty dramatic. No American would imagine what it means to live 10 meters below sea level. I have been for quite some time part of the IPCC, the UN climate panel. The best climate scientists gather together, produce their common knowledge, and they were very clear, we only have 10 more years. The next 10 years are decisive. And we lost already 30 years. So we need radical measures. If not, we will be confronted with many, many surprises. We will be confronted with weather extremes, and the weather extremes will directly impacting us in the most harmful way you can imagine. But deep down inside, this crisis is nested in our own mind and body. A part of us is egoistic, a part of you is egoistic, a part of myself, and we need to accept that. There's always a tendency to grow more and more and to be greedy. And if we continue with that, there's no way out. So we need a transition of our systems, of the food system and the mobility and the energy system, but also of the most complex system we know, of our own system. We need a transition in ourselves. The way we live, the way we think, the way we act. So the crisis is in ourselves. So what I expect is happening in the next decade is crisis after crisis after crisis. We are now confronted with a big recession worldwide as a result of COVID-19, but there will come a climate crisis. That is quite easy to predict that, because it's looming, and that will be a much bigger crisis than the COVID-19 crisis, and then the most important, imminent, the nature crisis, because of the loss of biodiversity. And before you think that I'm pessimistic and that there's no way out, on the contrary, we stumble from one crisis to the other the coming decades, but I think these crises are a blessing in disguise. It's very difficult to change our behavior and change our mental system unless we are confronted with crisis. So we learn most from crisis. We hate to be changed by other people. We dislike to change unless there is an urgent reason. So people are stubborn. You have behavior, myself as well, which is for 90% daily behavior, routine behavior. People really change in case of crisis. How does it work? Well, what we see in each systemic crisis is that a small group of people is really transforming. 5–10%, not more than that. But every crisis counts, let's say, and adds up to the amount of people that are transforming. So we've seen that after the last crisis in 2008-9 and now again. So if we reach the tipping point, and that means not 50% but 25%, that we have found in empirically based studies, 25%, that is the hope that I'm giving you, then we reach the turning point. And then the remaining 75% takes another generation but can go relatively fast. So all the journalists ask me, will the world be fundamentally different after Corona? No. I don't even think that there will be a world after Corona, but that we need to live with Corona. No, it goes step by step, but it adds up to the 25%. And if we reach the climate crisis, I think we have reached the tipping point of 25%, and I expect that between now and 2030. So we need a systemic change, a drastic, fundamental, radical change. I call that a transition. That is a fundamental change in the way we think, act and organize. And that is at the deepest level you can imagine. And in particular, the change in thinking is difficult to us, because the way we think is deeply rooted into our value systems and paradigms, and therefore education is key. If you want to change that, you should do that at the youngest possible age, and education plays a key role in that. When I started my career working on transitions, nobody listened, I was completely ignored, so you feel lonely and isolated. Then you get a lot of resistance, you need to accept that and even enjoy the resistance. There was hardly any attention. Look at the picture now, transitions are all over the place. Most people know of the energy transition, but the food and agriculture transition is also prominent, mobility transition, but also in education and healthcare, building, city development. Wow, there's no escape anymore. And this is the symptom of the in-between times, the change from one era to the other. If you look at what drives the transition, there's a multitude of drivers. It's not only based on technological developments, it's also based on economic developments, but also based on the pressure that we put on these systems. We as citizens, as consumers, as society. Very, very important. You have more potential power than you might think of. If you as a group are forming and protesting against the system, that might have a tremendous impact. But it's also a shift in power. There's always let's say, a group that has the power. I call that a regime. For instance, the fossil fuel producers. And there are niches, the renewable niches, that wants to get that power. There's always the fight between the one and the other. And that's the evolutionary part of the revolution. As soon as the niches get the power, they will resist themselves against the later on developing niches that wants to have the power. So it's not so much the good and the bad boys, it is more a natural shift that happens once every, well, let's say 3, 4, 5 decades. Chaos and transitions require a different planning than we are used to. I call it organic planning. The normal command and control planning is failing because there is too many uncertainties, there's too much complexity, but it requires organic planning. So you need to start experiments from a long-term vision and learn from that, and it's a matter of learning by doing and doing by learning. And this is what we 20 years ago already delivered. Developing a long-term vision for the next decades, and then creating space for radical innovation, not incremental but radical innovation. Then start a number of pathways and doing a lot of experiments, learn from that, scale them up, Go back to your starting point, so it's more a spiraling process. And I'm doing this all over the place with countries, with companies, with citizens. And sometimes it is successful, sometimes we are failing, but this is extensively documented in the literature. Chaos. Well, I want to celebrate chaos with you this afternoon, because chaos means the old systems are breaking down and the new systems are rising. And we need to celebrate it. The more chaos we have, the deeper we reach the core of the transition. Chaos means literally, in the old Greek terms, the rising of something new, the birth of something new. So the old Greek people celebrated chaos. And look at this, 6 million people last year, young people, who protested, they protested against a failing climate policy. When I started my career, I could never have dreamed of 6 million people going onto the streets fighting for climate change. And I was in The Hague at the Malieveld. This could have been my daughter. I gave a small speech there, and she stood there, and I approached her. I said, well, this is quite a statement. And she said, well, you shouldn't take it literally. I said, no, I don't take it literally, but it's still quite a bold statement. And then she said, yeah, but you fucked it up, your generation. And I was quite emotional. I've been fighting for it all the time, but indeed, we failed. And she told me, we are coming back next year, in 2 years, and we are not going to talk about it anymore. We need imminent action. 13 years ago, I initiated this group of people together with Maya Minnesma, Urgent Agenda. It became a little bit world famous because of the fact that we sued the state of the Netherlands 5 years ago, and we won in higher appeal and in highest appeal. So this is mimicked by many other people in quite a few countries. There are at least 10 different countries where citizens stand up, supported by NGOs, and suing the state of what a country they are living in. But this is a sign of the times. That a small group of people supported by citizens says, this is the limit. We don't accept this any longer. Why? Well, during my career, we have been going down in the Netherlands. Look at this picture. This picture shows 27 countries in Europe. 27 countries. We are the last, 27th. This picture shows how much energy you produce in a sustainable manner. We do that only with 7.5% of our energy. And look at the top 10. Sweden, Finland, Denmark. When I started my career, we were in the top 10. And now we are number 27. So we have a big mouth, in particular to other countries, and we are failing. Because of a lack of leadership in politics, lack of leadership in ourselves, because of our polder model. We always want to have a broad support, and that means that the speed is determined by the slowest and not by the fastest. So there are good reasons, but this is really something we should be ashamed of. When I visit other countries, I'm absolutely ashamed. The good news is, in times of chaos, and the chaos will be even more the coming years, small groups of people can make a difference. Because chaos means also instability. If the systems become unstable, small group of people can have a big impact. I present now to you the Dutch energy challenge in a few pictures. And then you see the enormity of the challenge we are facing. Windmills on land, at sea. We've done our best over the last 25 years. Here you see a picture of these wind parks at the North Sea. What have we done? 2,500 windmills. What do we need in order to achieve the climate goals? 25,000 more. What do you think of this picture? 25,000 more. Oh yeah, and then we talk about hydrogen. But if you want to make hydrogen, you need solar and wind. Otherwise, you don't do it in a green manner, and you produce it from natural gas. And that produces a lot of CO2. So if you want to use green hydrogen, you need another 10 wind farms at the North Sea. Well, is there a place anyhow at the North Sea? No, there isn't. So we are going to import it from North Africa, from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Patagonia. So hydrogen will become imported, but not before 2030. And for 3/4 we are going to import it from very vulnerable regions and countries. That's the shadow side of the hype that is created among hydrogen. Solar panels. Picture from Rotterdam, the new railway station, 10,000 solar panels, beautiful. What have we done? 7 gigawatt over the last 20 years. What do we need? 70 gigawatt. 100,000 football pitches. And please don't put them on the ground only. First the roofs, and then the front walls, and then on the ground. This can become pretty dramatic if we do that all over the place. You know who are the owners of these solar pitches? The owners come from China, Japan, Germany, England, US, not from the Netherlands. Front walls and the roofs. There's 2.5 billion square meters surface that we don't use on the roofs and on the walls. And if we would use that for solar energy, we could spare 4 or 5 big energy production factories. So, this is huge. Houses from wood. Well, that houses from biomass in general, I think that's really challenging and it is promising. I support that. We've built 500 of them, only 500. There's 1 million new houses we want to build in the Netherlands. If we do that based on stone and cement, that's pretty dramatic because we are then generating 55 megaton CO2. If we would build it from wood, we can save 100 megaton CO2. That's about 1/4 of the total amount we are generating in the Netherlands we can save. And there is enough wood we can extract from the production forest in the Netherlands or outside the Netherlands. This can be realized. This can be realized. This is a circular building, beautiful building that's designed by Thomas Rau, famous sustainable architect. It's the renaissance of an existing building, beautiful. Nothing is new. 80% there was already of the old building, and every material has its own passport. So if you want to break it down and build it up again, you can see where you can use it for. And even the working clothes of the people who worked in the old building is reused into isolation. So that's beautiful. But there are only 25 of these buildings. 25. 1 million to go. So we talk about the circular economy. Every week there is a conference. 25 buildings. 1 million to go. We are getting the existing houses from natural gas, which is good in order to achieve the climate goals. And we have achieved that, let's say, for thousands of existing houses in Tilburg, even in Groningen, in the epicenter. But look at the challenge. We have 7 million existing houses. If you want to make them gas-free in 20 years, that means 2,000 or 1,500 per day, but we are still building new houses with gas. So if you add that up, that means 2,000 per day. Wow, what have we done over the last 4 or 5 years? In the last 4 years, we decoupled 2,000 existing houses from natural gas. So what we have been doing in 4 years, we need to do every day 20 years. Can you imagine? Every time I show these figures, people are astonished. They don't know the figures. So what we have been doing in 4 years, we need to do every day 20 years. And if we take 30 years, it is 1,500 per day. Conclusion? It must go 10 times faster and smarter. Second and almost last part, what does it mean to education? Well, we need a general kind of transition in education, more personalized, the student and the teacher central, and not the organization. Not so much aiming at efficiency, but more in quality and time, and let's say everybody needs to have equal chances. Now, in particular the HBO, very important part of it. We need different kind of curricula, different kind of courses, different competences, very clearly. That means, in my view, that the overarching themes we are confronted with in society should be leading. Things like climate change, the whole digitization, globalization, sustainable food, loss of biodiversity. What we are seeing in Finland is that they take these overarching themes and, let's say, the courses and the themes are the starting point, and the knowledge is put within the frame of these big themes. So that means that searching, learning, experimenting becomes the starting point, because the knowledge is rapidly evolving. What we are learning now might be outdated in 5 years from now. So we need to develop more experimental designs in education, and I'm glad that you are doing that, also based on design-based education. I think it's crucial to do that together with companies, because they usually have the forefront knowledge that the education can learn from, and then you can create those campuses that we see all over the place. Here is the sustainability factory in Dordrecht, the old shipping farm here, the RDM campus in Rotterdam, where companies are getting together with students. You can have a traineeship there. So it's a matter of searching, learning, experimenting there in one place. So the collaboration with companies is absolutely key here. I see in the future more place for these overarching themes than the subjects itself, and much more multi and interdisciplinary. What I've been doing over the last 35 years is putting together all kind of disciplines into one group, from philosophers to economists, and from natural scientists to, let's say, social psychologists. And then learning by doing and doing by learning. And the competences which are very important are thinking together and working together, interpreting different sources of knowledge, critical thinking and analysis is very, very important. And I'm glad, I mentioned it already, that you've chosen this design-based education as a starting principle, because that fits within the principles that I sketched, where the teacher becomes more or less a facilitator and the students are in the lead, very, very important, but I've warned already 2 years ago here, it's not the Holy Grail. It is a matter of, let's say, fine-tuning the relation between the teachers and the students, and there's no, let's say, because you have 10 different kinds of new concepts that you might use. So my plea would be adjust it based on what you are learning and apply it in the most dynamic way. I hope that you realize that you are part of a kind of a movement in the education field. A couple of years ago, I was lucky to be one of the initiators of the movement Catapult at the HBO level and the MBO level. All kinds of schools are, let's say, transforming now, and we need to support each other, because we all want a different kind of education system. which is less bureaucratic and more putting the student central, acting from a long-term vision. So be aware that each and every school is experimenting with this. So it is feasible. Huh? We can reach the climate, the sustainability goals if we want. We have everything that we need. We have the knowledge, we have the expertise, we have the power, we have the institutions. The point is, do we really, really, really want it? If we really want it, we can do it. And I round up with this statement, I always do. Everybody said it was impossible until somebody stepped by who didn't know that. And that was me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk and also already explaining what we are doing. Shall we take a seat?
Yes. I'll take this one.
Yeah, that's fine. I hear some, I wrote down a couple of things, but I can imagine that there are questions from the room first, because you are, as you've heard, the most important people in this room right now. Sorry, ladies first.
Thank you first of all for sharing all the ideas and thoughts. I really appreciate it. And I also hope that the current movement we have in our generation with Fridays for Future, it kind of shows you that what you're doing is actually having results. And I hope that gives you, you cum laude, you never got through visas. So let me give you a cum laude for my generation, I guess. And my question would be like, what are small things we should do to, not prevent it, but to reduce the climate crisis or the ecological crisis? What can I do tomorrow morning to make it a little bit better, please?
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Earlier this morning I gave some personal advice to the students at the ROC. What you can do. Let me give you a couple of things. First of all, become a member of the climate youth movement. Yesterday there was a big election of citizen initiatives organized by the daily newspaper Trouw. 100 examples, and the very first place was in the hands of the climate youth movement. There are thousands of young people between 16 and 25 that support this climate young movement, and they have impact. They sit together with our cabinet, next week they sit together with Shell. I'm also doing a project with Shell Netherlands in order to make that transformation. But so become a member of the climate youth movement, very important, support that. Globally, there are millions of young people supporting that. It's part of a global climate movement. Secondly, be critical in your own environment, your own school. Is sustainability and circularity already the core of the education here? If I would ask that to you, do you feel it, that it is the core of your education program?
I would say they're trying and they have the idea, but I don't see it in all the actions. Like some things they do, and I just look at the action and I'm like, okay, like for weeks you have lectures about sustainability and you read it once a week in our emails, but then you implement free coffee machines with paper cups.
Okay.
And I'm just like, that's absolutely not sustainable. Also, we have a lot of plastic forks. So there's a lot of waste still, and some actions are not, I don't see it there.
Okay, so there is room for improvement. Then I make you responsible and some other people in the room to organize a small group, I call it a transition team, 5 people at most, that are generating a plan for how to make this place even more sustainable in terms of energy, in terms of materials, in terms of, let's say, even this kind of things, but also in terms of the forefront knowledge we have. Because there were a couple of things I told you that were pretty new to you. and that should become part of your day-to-day curriculum. So I'm willing to guide you with that. So I give you my, let's say, affiliations. If you create a team, a kind of a transition team, then I'm going to support you, and then I come back. In 2 years from now, this place has become fully sustainable. Point? Yeah? Do we have a deal?
We have a plan, let's say it like this.
Okay. At least we have a plan. Thirdly, to make it even more personal, you can adjust your lifestyle. To what extent are you living a sustainable lifestyle?
I don't have a driver's license because I don't want to drive my car. I do, at least in Germany, I do my groceries in the store where you use your own beverage, like your own cups.
Yeah.
So I don't buy packed rice, for example.
Okay, very good.
I try to bring my own cutlery when I'm getting food to go. I have always my bottles.
Wow, quite impressive.
And the coffee mug to go.
Okay. Well, the driver's license we share. I also don't have a driver's license. I'm one of the few. But think about your clothes. Well, this is a sustainable jacket. It's made from biological cotton. And you can fully reuse it. Might be still expensive for most people, but it's getting, let's say, cheaper now. So clothes are very important. There's a lot of waste and spillovers in the clothing industry. In all the things that you possess, eating meat, if you don't eat meat 2 or 3 times a week, and you do that for 1 year, you save as much as energy and CO2 as if you wouldn't drive a car for a whole year. That's unbelievable. Producing meat and eating meat is one of the big polluters in this planet. Very important. If you go on holiday in Europe, take the train and not the airplane. It saves you 4 times the amount of energy. Taking a shower. If you take a shower of 10 minutes or 5 minutes, that is already a factor 3, 4 different. So it's all in the details. Very important. So that is what you can do, and you as a group are much more powerful than you might think. If all the students in Fryslân or even outside would stand up and say, okay, we want to become the most sustainable school in the Netherlands or in Fryslân, it can be realized within a few years. So the pressure that you are putting on the system can be enormous. The former CEO of Unilever, Paul Polman, says the pressure from consumers on companies like Unilever is really, really underestimated. A group of consumers of about, let's say, 1 million consumers getting together, putting pressure on Unilever can destroy our whole company within a few weeks, he mentioned. So, I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you very much.
It's in yourself, it's in your environment, it's in the globe.
It is.
A friend of mine always says everything we do as humans is nature. The same as if a bird makes a nest, we consider it nature. And we start farms a long time ago, and we would consider them nature because you're in nature. But why we still not? It isn't nature anymore. So he says everything we do as humans is nature. Polluting is nature, so we don't have to do anything about it. What are your stance on it?
Okay, I wholeheartedly disagree with that, because the way we are doing things is highly unnatural. Couple of examples. I gave the example of a tennis ball this morning. Are you playing tennis? No, but you have been doing it for some time. A tennis ball is composed of about 50 different resources and materials. There's clay, there's magnesium, there's all kinds of things that comes from 4 different continents. Africa, the Far East, Australia, all these continents, they travel about 80,000 kilometers, 4 times around the world. Then they are traveling to Schlesinger, that's a tennis ball factory quite close to Wimbledon, and they are making a tennis ball out of it. We use it about 25 times and then we throw it away. And then the director of Schlesinger says that's the most cost-effective way of producing a tennis ball. So, the traveling costs are ignored, the pollution costs are ignored. So a tennis ball, before you're using it, is traveling 4 times around the world. That's crazy. We are the second largest food exporter in the world, in the Netherlands, because we produce food in a highly unnatural way. United States is the biggest and we are the second. Why? We are getting everything out of 1 hectare. Because of all the pesticides we use and all the manure, that is highly unnatural. So I wish we would do it in a more natural way. Then we wouldn't be confronted with all these environmental problems. COVID-19 learns us that we are performing in an unnatural way. Everything that we are doing must be done in the most efficient and effective way. Nature has resilience. Nature is not moving only along the efficiency and effectiveness line. Nature has reserve potentials. We don't have. So, one of my recommendations in my writings on the COVID-19 crisis was, in the education system, we should oblige students to learn more from nature. So I wish that 1 or 2 weeks a year you are going into nature and learn from nature. And there's a special research field, biomimicry, that is really aimed at what can we learn from nature in a way that we can produce more natural things. Once I was in a tropical rainforest deep down in Brazil, and I survived there for more than a week by eating and drinking only from the rainforest. And I couldn't have done that without the support of a guide, an Indian guy. He learned me that almost everything that was growing could be used in the most natural way. And I was totally unaware of that. I was ignorant. So you learn how beautiful nature is built up. So you see my point of reasoning.
Yeah, I totally agree with that it's very important to learn from nature. But when does it stop being nature? Because if you're hunting and gathering yourself, we consider it nature. But if you let someone else do it for you and you got more steps in the process, it stops being nature. Or don't you agree?
It depends on your context. In the Netherlands we hardly have any nature anymore, because we adjusted it or destroyed it. Do you know, in the Netherlands, what was the main ecosystem, let's say 100,000 years ago? Do you know what it was?
I think swamps and water.
Forest.
Forest.
Forest. You can hardly imagine now. We were all covered with forest.
Yeah.
That's why it's called Holland. It means woodland.
Yeah. So we have drifted quite far away from this. But in other places, if you visit places in the United States, the far west, in Latin America, let's say what I've seen at the North and South Pole, in Australia, New Zealand, that's of a different kind. And you should look at the latest documentary of David Attenborough on Netflix. I've just seen it. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. That gives you an impression between the thin borderline what was nature, what is nature, and what has been, and that you can hardly imagine anymore. But it's beautiful. It's about 90 minutes. Impressive what he is showing you.
I will watch it.
Yeah, that's absolutely something I can recommend.
One thing to put here is our ecological or economical paradigm we have. I think years and years and years of education taught us that nature is in help of our economy. So nature is part of our economy. Although actually our economy is part of our ecology. And then suddenly it has a whole different meaning.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I refer to as we feel superior towards nature. And that is almost a philosophical statement. So I think that we should realize that nature has an enormous power, much more powerful than we think. And I think that the economy is part of nature and the natural ecosystems rather than the other way around. At least we should strive for more balance between us, ourselves, and nature. And that is what you see, let's say, the last years popping up also based on the work of Kate Raworth, and also I'm glad that even economists admit that there's a huge imbalance. And when I started my career, and sometimes you see that in these economic education areas, where they say, well, ecology or let's say the environment is an externality. An externality, that is almost criminal if you state that. So that means that you consider the economic system as a whole, and everything that is related to that you call an externality, like the environment or ecosystem or nature. Well, sometimes that's perhaps bold, but if you still teach that students, you should be put in prison, I think. Yeah, that's something you cannot account any longer for.
I actually have multiple questions.
Yeah,
If that's okay.
that's very good.
First of all, is it possible that we praise biodiversity too much? And isn't it a little bit egocentric to expect nature to always stay the same if we are changing so much?
I couldn't follow the first part of your sentence.
Well, do we praise biodiversity too much? Like, what happens if some species go extinct, but they make room for new species? But we expect it to stay the same while we change so much because we expect it to stay the same because it suits us so well. Isn't that a little bit egocentric?
I really love the question, and can I ask a question back?
No, I understand the question.
Yeah, I understand it too,
Yeah.
but I think what you mean is, are we in our evolution, in our evolution, are we as humans further in our evolution than just a little bit of grass?
Well, maybe more, are we as humans trying to interfere with evolution?
No, but I understand your question. I try to answer it in the most concise way. I think there's a misconception here. Biodiversity is not equivalent with loss of species only. You can at least denote it at different kinds of levels. Biodiversity is partly related to loss of species, but also to the loss of ecosystems at a more systemic level. And if you talk about ecosystems, you're talking about the coherence between species, but also humans interfering with that. So the point is, perhaps, and there have been studies accounting for the fact that even if we lose 10 or 20 or 30% of our species, it still doesn't need to be dramatic. But some musician rephrased it as, let's take a composer piece of Mozart. What would happen if you would take out some notes out of it? Would it still be recognizable or not? The point is, some of the species are crucial for maintaining the ecosystems, and some not. The point is, which ones are crucial and which ones not? The answer is, we don't know. We don't know. We still even find new species every day, every week. So we don't know the whole picture. So what happens if we are taking out particular species and we don't know what their impact is on the whole ecosystem and ourselves? For instance, what will happen if the bees would disappear? That's pretty dramatic. That has a huge impact on the whole chain and on the whole ecosystems. But out of the 1 million species that are threatened, there might be 100,000 that we still can miss. But then you are playing a risky game. Then you are playing in the casino, the biodiversity casino. And that's a kind of a roulette. So you get the roulette and you might say, okay, these numbers I can miss and these, and what happens then in the greater picture is still unknown. Well, I wouldn't play that highly risky game, to be frank. But you had more questions.
I have more questions, yes. To what extent are European countries now working together to create solar or green energy?
Who are working together?
The European countries, because you have the whole
Oh.
world. We are not the number 27, but and to what extent are all of the countries working together to force this?
Well, actually, they are hardly working together. There's even more competition. To give an example, Germany is one of the front runners. And Germany subsidized solar and wind energy in a way that by introduction, the feed-in tariff, and then the price dropped vastly of solar and wind energy, and there was great annoyance among the surrounding countries, like the Netherlands and Austria and Poland, because they said, well, that's unfair competition. They are subsidizing, over-subsidizing it. So there's growing irritation. They are working together on, let's say, the new Green Deal now. Have you heard about the new Green Deal? Which is, well, pretty ambitious to make Europe carbon-free in 30 years. Carbon-free. A carbon-free economy, well, that's hardly thinkable. Everything that you wear is made of carbon, for instance. Even this. So carbon-free in 30 years, it is really a daunting challenge. But what you see is, each and every country in Europe has its own strategy with regard to renewables, with regard to nuclear energy. Germany is phasing out nuclear energy. The UK is still working with nuclear energy. Here it is also being promoted now, nuclear energy. I don't think it has a real future in the Netherlands. In Finland they are creating now another new nuclear plant. So in France they have still 69 nuclear plants. So every country makes its own choice. And collaboration would certainly help, and if you think about hydrogen, that's something we cannot realize without collaboration. So in Northwestern Europe, we need to collaborate more in order to produce hydrogen together. And then I'm talking about the Netherlands, Germany, England, Denmark, Sweden, Finland. We need to work together, otherwise we don't have the right capacity and the scale to produce it, and then we lose the battle with China and Australia and Africa and Japan.
Why did we start competing if collaboration is so much more?
Well, it's business. It's business, and you know, it's driven by big energy companies, and it's driven by also politics. In the Netherlands we have seen a lack of political leadership for decades. Now it's getting better, but in Germany the green parties have become part of the government there for 3 different cabinets, and that made a difference. So it is culture. In Germany it started with a citizen movement in the 70s of the last century that wanted to create a clean society. They were fully against nuclear energy, and then it ran into politics. In the Netherlands we started with politics. So we, in terms of plans, we were #1 in the world. We had the very first integral environmental plan in the world in 1988 when I worked at RIBM. There was a plan that nobody had seen before. All the environmental problems packed together with different norms and different goals. But the step from plan to implementation is a difficult one in the Netherlands. So we are not so good in executing it and implementing it, because there are too many obstacles and barriers. Because of the polder model, we want to get everybody around the table, and then the speed is always determined by the slowest and not by the fast. But this is the area where you need radical decisions. And that causes pain. I call that a transition pain. For instance, you and I are going to pay more for energy the next 10 years. Your energy account will be in 10 years from now 2 or 3 times higher than now, because we need to invest in a completely new energy infrastructure. After that, it will become cheaper. But first we need to go through the pain. And then we will profit from it. That's always the problem with a transition. You first need to invest, and then only 10 or 20 years later you will get the profit. More questions?
I still have the last one actually.
Okay, try to be brief.
One more.
Okay. What is how sustainable is sustainable energy? So what is the full circle of solar energy and durability of it and the waste?
Yeah, we discussed that on the way here too. Sustainable energy, as we know it, is not fully sustainable. Why not? Let's take the solar panels. They have a lifetime of about 20-25 years. What will happen after? Well, if you throw them away, well, that's still heavy stuff. There's a lot of silicium in it. That's wasteful. So, what we need to do is reusing it. Big problem with the accus. In my Tesla car, there are already 2 companies who are reusing existing accus and put them into other electric cars. So what we need is new industries, entrepreneurs who are going to reuse solar panels, accus, wind farms, and you see that industry emerging. So sustainable as we know it is not sustainable enough, because the real problem is not the energy transition but the material transition, resources. There are 70 scarce earth metals like lithium and silicium, scandium, neodymium, and we need them for our solar, wind and electric cars, and they are very unevenly distributed all over the world. China has a lot, Africa. They are in Europe only deep down in the old coal mines that we closed down. Yeah, so the real problem is the resource problem. But I learned one transition at a time. Otherwise it becomes too complicated for you. But after the energy transition, the resource transition will pop up. And the only country that is really investing in it is China. When I was in Africa last year, I was in Uganda. They are developing a completely new infrastructure in terms of a road traffic system. And I wanted to have cash money there, and there were two options in the cash machine: Ugandese money and Chinese money in Uganda. And in Europe, wow, we have turned a bit old-fashioned. I was called by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, do we need a foreign resource policy? I said, yes, what would you think? You are already too late. The Chinese have that already for more than 20 years. So if you talk about hydrogen, we will become even more important and dependent from the Middle East and North Africa. I'm talking about Libya, I'm talking about Morocco, I'm talking about Tunisia. Do we want to become dependent on these highly unstable regions? No, but we will be. Okay, next questions. Yeah, there are many more. The more the better.
Samuel.
Yeah, I have a question. You are speaking a lot about the legal leadership right now. So why is that in this time with COVID-19 that our government is saying, yeah, we are not taking our responsibilities for like the whole people living in the Netherlands? It's just now a great moment to start being a leader and taking a different direction, right?
I absolutely agree with you, and we need different kinds of leadership. We need authentic leadership, that people feel that what you say is also what you mean and what you are living for, that you are authentic as a person. And we also need connecting leadership, that you are connecting the old and the new systems. Example of an authentic leader, I think, is Angela Merkel.
Yeah, because what I'm thinking right now is the COVID-19 time is just the time to change as well for the environment, right?
Yeah.
Because we said we need to give the earth back what we took from the earth, and they are now, the earth is not paying back after this pandemic, but that is just now the time to give something back to the earth, right? Is it?
Fully agree. But I'm doing now a project with big companies, multinationals, like Shell and KLM, and they all stopped because they say there's now the crisis, we are first going to reorganize, and then later we pick up the sustainability line. That's a lack of leadership, because in my perspective, you now need to invest more than ever in the new sustainable business models. But they say first we need 2 years of reorganization and then we pick it up later. But Angela Merkel said, we schaffen das. And it's for good reason that she has a natural physical background. She understands the complexity of the matter. But we schaffen das, and she was partly wrong and partly right. But if the storm becomes heavy and you stand still and tight, then you are a real leader. We have Mark Rutte, that's fine, but it's more a manager. He's moving in the most flexible way, but he never showed, wir schaffen das. And that's the kind of leadership that we need, and I think the future is also to feminine leadership, female values, and then I'm more referring to the connecting the old and the new. You see in this crisis that all the classical leaders, let's say the top-down leaders, are failing. Look at Trump, look at Bolsonaro, look at Putin, they're all failing because they cannot deal with uncertainties and risk. And you see that the female leaders are more successful. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, Germany, Denmark, that's striking. Yes. Yeah.
I got several questions, but the first one I think that's maybe connecting to Samuel's question. In your presentation, you showed us a chart where the Netherlands was on place 20 or so. 27. 27, it's even more bad. And you said that 20 or 10 years ago we were
No, I said about 30 years ago we were on place 10, and now we are on place 27.
Okay, well, why are we moved to 27? Did just other countries invest more in sustainability, or what's the reason why we decreased to 27 now?
Well, I normally give a couple of reasons. A few of them I mentioned already. Lack of political leadership.
Yeah.
There was hardly any big political party which took that sustainable leadership in the Netherlands, and we've seen that in Germany, we've seen that in Scandinavia, in other countries, even France, but not in the Netherlands. Even when my good colleague Diederik Samson entered the political scene, I was a bit disappointed, because he became part of that polder model play, and he told me a couple of years ago, although I like him most and I admired him, but he told me, in your world sustainability is the most important topic, but in The Hague it's not. And I asked him, but you need to change that, but that's impossible to do that on my own, he told me. And that is part, you become part of the power play, so that's very important, but also we have had a lot of influence of the shells of this world. So the multinationals that we created, the Tata Steel, the Shells, literally they try to delay the energy transition. 20 years ago I started a project with the Ministry of Economic Affairs and the Environment called the Energy Transition. And we developed a long-term vision. We started hundreds of projects. We had 10 different transition pathways, quite successful. 5 years later, there was a task force initiated. Who became the leader of the task force? The president director of Shell Netherlands, Rijn Willems. He approached me, he said, Jan, not too fast. This is going too fast, the energy transition. That is not favorable for Shell and not for the BV Netherlands. And I was shocked. And what he did, he dismantled the whole project.
And I guess those companies have a lot of, they have a lot of influences on the Dutch government and the decisions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's another reason, we have a failing innovation policy with regard to sustainability.
Yeah.
So that means we are supporting things like solar and wind and now electric cars, and as soon as it stretches out, then we are taking off our hands and say the market needs to take it up, and that is still too early. So we are seeing that now with solar, that we say, well, in 2 years from now we stop with subsidizing it, and now the electric cars, we have already stopped subsidizing it. So from next year on, my Tesla becomes twice as expensive.
Yeah.
Because they call it unfair competition with the gasoline cars. My gosh, unfair competition. Every life cycle analysis shows that an electric car is much more sustainable than a gasoline car.
Yeah, I think the electric cars will come more up now because Teslas are quite expensive. So they're all leased now, but more and more car brands are producing their own electric cars, so they get better and better as well.
Yeah.
So I think we will see more in the future.
Yeah.
And my
And one funny last argument I always mention is that if you look at our history in the Netherlands, we have a very black history. So we started digging the turf, how do you call that in English?
The peat.
The peat.
Peaty whiskey.
Yeah, peat. So we started digging peat already at medieval ages. So that means that nobody knows that, but the land level dropped by about 5 meters the last 1,000 years. Because we digged it and let's say we burned it. And then coal, and then oil, and then gas. So we are the most polluting, that's in our genes, in our DNA. We are burning and polluting every kind of, let's say, crap. And as soon as we learn that we can make money out of renewables, then it can go fast. That's the hope I'm giving you. So that's another factor. More question.
Yeah, the design-based education, why is it for Stenden such a step forward? Or, yeah, why is it better for me and for us as students to be now in design-based education?
Well, a couple of reasons. First, you are more in the lead.
Yeah.
It's more personalized based, centered around you as a person and your needs. And the teacher is going to help you and facilitate you. So there's an enormous diversity of students. So the differences are perhaps larger than the commonalities. And I think there's a big future for personalized education. When I grew up in my education system, I always wanted to have the forefront knowledge. There was no internet, can you imagine that time? So I was running into the libraries every day. And the teachers complained, and let's suppose that I would have had internet. Well, but I was told, you need to comply yourself with the other students in the class. There was no way I could go faster or, let's say, skip a class. Well, the reason was that, well, the result was that I became a highly irritant, annoyable person. Yeah. And so that egalitarian system was wrong anyhow. Now it's more personalized based, big advantage. Two, it's more towards searching, learning, experimenting, because the knowledge that I am spreading and you are learning is very fluid. It develops very rapidly, so you need to continuously adjust to it. Very important. So it fits more with the new economic paradigm. And you can do it together with companies. So I see more advantages than disadvantages, to be frank. You don't agree with it, or you don't feel it already?
No, I absolutely agree, but it, yeah, we just hear, of course, a lot of, yeah, we hear a lot of advantages from people from Stenden and from school and from NHL, because, of course, they're really enthusiastic about it, and I am too, don't get me wrong, but I was just, yeah, I was just wondering what somebody who was out of the organization was thinking about design-based education. So that was why I asked.
Yeah, I told already the organization 2 years ago when I was at the opening ceremony of your HBO. But I also warned, there's no holy grail. If you have excellent teachers and excellent motivated students, well, then let's say the concept that you are using is not determining. I know of 10 other different concepts that you might use. That's not the holy grail. But you understand what I mean. That is.
I agree, because you're constantly adapting to new situations. For
Yeah.
example, now I'm yeah, discovering more COVID yeah, related issues. So that's absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, people know that they're our
Quite right.
Yeah.
Quite right. Even COVID might turn into a new topic for your design-based education.
Yeah.
Because I think it will be part of the rest of our life, in which form or whatever, and there will be succeeding COVID. So even that you can encapsulate in your education system.
Yeah, yeah, that's I think what we're already doing. So that's really nice.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
my pleasure. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question related to COVID-19. As you earlier said, you think that changes and chaos is needed, and most of us here are hospitality students, and the hospitality industry was struck hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. What do you advise us, like the people who are just beginning to start their life in business, basically after their study, with how to cope with this situation, especially when you say chaos and change is needed to align our priorities?
Yeah, I didn't emphasize that perhaps, but what I'm really saying underneath is we have to live, to learn living with uncertainties. That is exactly demonstrated in this crisis. Last week I had an interrogation with 2 Dutch ministers on the COVID-19 crisis, in particular the COVID-19 policies. And what I said was, if you look at the complexity of COVID-19 and the underlying uncertainties, there are 3 important elements. First, you need to be proactive. We have been too late 3 times now. We have been too late at the beginning of the crisis, 2 weeks later than necessary. We have been doing nothing over summer, as if the virus wasn't there for 2 months. And we are now too late. And if you look at the underlying complexity, it's a highly nonlinear exponential growth curve of the virus, which you can account for if you understand a little bit more of the complexity. And we ignore that. We ignore that. And the second thing is about the communication. We still communicate in a top-down manner about people, not with people. And the third is about the long-term perspective. People are missing a longer-term perspective. And that is really leadership. Real leadership is that you say, we need to live with this for the next 1-2 years. And every kind of... Are you getting nervous? And every kind of policy is aimed for the next 2-3 weeks within the longer term perspective. So, a little bit technical, but you have different kinds of uncertainties. And COVID-19 is interesting, because you have uncertainty. I mentioned 3 types of uncertainty. I did a lot of research into uncertainty in the beginning of my career. There are things you know that you don't know, first. There are things you don't know that you don't know, for instance the black swans, and there are things you don't know that you know. And that is on COVID-19. So that means we knew that there could occur a pandemic, but we ignored that knowledge. We ignored it because it was an unpleasant message. So 10 years ago we were warned, 5 years ago we were warned, 2 years ago, it was part of our national safety strategy. We ignored it. So the events with a small chance but a high impact we ignore, like COVID-19. The events with a high chance but a relatively low impact we are focusing on, like terrorist attacks. So in your education system you should focus more on, let's say, the things you don't know that you know, like COVID-19. Events, occurrences with a small chance of occurring but a high impact. And companies also need to take that as a kind of a starting point.
Thank you. We're almost out of time.
That's a pity.
Yeah, it's really a pity.
But Bauer is getting a bit nervous because I need to leave. Okay.
Exactly.
But I'm open for 1 or 2 more questions then.
Okay. This lady and the gentleman over there.
To extend your topic about the long-term perspective, how do we change the mindset of other people who are not, or maybe are aware of doing something unsustainable, or maybe even are not aware? How do we change their perspective into a long-term perspective, like for
yeah, good question.
And government and all like levels of society? Because that's, I think, I mean, we have different sorts of values, of course, for psychological like behaviors, but for now it's very important to act in a short term of time, that we have to make it more visible.
Well, good point, very difficult to answer, try to be brief. First of all, there are more differences among people than commonalities, so at least there are 4 different groups of people we need to take into account. There are people who are willing and able to change. That is a relatively small group, 5-10%. They are willing and able. there are groups that are willing but not able, that's about 25%. There are groups that are not willing but able, that's another 25%, and 40% is not willing and not able. And the point is, in your strategy, and that's my perspective, you better focus on the willing and able first, the front runners, then the front runners of the peloton, the pack, those who are willing but not able, then those who are not willing but able, and then, let's say, the pack and the laggards. So that is a variant on the innovation curve of Rogers. So it doesn't make too much sense to focus on the laggards. In the Netherlands, about 20% of the people, and most of them, they vote for the extreme right-wing parties. They are not willing and able. So I have had a debate with Thierry Baudet, and there's no way I can convince him. It was a debate of an hour, and I explained everything according to my rational knowledge, and he made a fairy tale out of it. And he has his own rationality, which is not scientifically based, but there's no way I can convince him. So that's a waste of my time. I am trying to convince people who are now, let's say, willing but not able, or not willing and able. That group of people I'm focusing on. In the Netherlands, we have now 1 million households who are having solar panels. I am now, that is the first 10%. I'm now focusing on the next 20-25%. Let's say 2-3 million households who can have solar panels within 5 years or so. And the first group, that took about 25 years. So it's better to do it group by group. And you can apply that to your school organization, or a company, or a municipality, or a country, but do it group by group, and not wasting any time of the laggards. They will get on board, and then they will explain you that they've always known it and seen it, but first waited till the advantages came. And even later they're going to convince you. That is sometimes what happens to me. People are going to explain to me how transitions work. Like Hans de Boer, former director of VNO, NCW. I gave a lecture with him last year, and he explained everything about transitions. And he said, Jan, do you know how that works? I said, well, I've been doing research all the time. Oh yeah, I forgot about it. You know, and 10 years ago, the word transition was, well, a different world. So don't waste your time with the laggards. They will come, but they are very stubborn. So do it group by group, and for each group you have a different kind of strategy.
Thank you.
Last question.
You mentioned that it's sustainable to build houses from wood, but a mortgage ensures that Netherlands don't have that much forest. So it means that you would import wood from other countries, from the poor countries with many forests like Russia, Ukraine, etc. Don't you think that it's a bit fake to be super sustainable here by using resources other poor countries?
Well, first of all, I'm more an adherent to biomass houses, so that you use a diversity of biomass. I've seen the first houses from humus or hennep. You are not getting high of that, by the way. People think, but that's... So you have more diversity and more choice than only wood, first. Secondly, I would prefer wood only if it comes from production forest that can be maintained in a sustainable way. So in the Netherlands, if we build 1 million houses from wood, we can do that for 75% from our own country. And then I think it's legitimate. If we get it from too far away, it's not sustainable, I agree with you. But most houses in Europe, we can build from wood from Europe. By the way, I'm working with IKEA. Did you know that IKEA is using 1% of the wood that we have in the world? 1%. And they want to become fully circular in 10 years from now. So in 10 years from now, you are not buying a piece of furniture from IKEA, but you are renting it. And then after 2 or 3 years you give it back, and they make something completely new out of it. So they become, let's say, a producer of resources and a maintainer of resources. Because you don't want to buy a lamp so much, you want to use the function of light. You don't want to buy furniture, you want to use the function of furniture. That is a completely different paradigm. But I agree with you, biomass, and therefore I'm totally against using biomass for energy production. That's a waste of time, it's harmful, we shouldn't do that. But using biomass for products that have a certain added value, like houses, but you can also make medicine out of it. DSM is producing medicines out of biomass. The whole pharmaceutical industry, cosmetic industry, I think as a replacement for oil and gas, I think there's a bright future for biomass there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, what a good question.
Good students.
Good group. High level.
Thank you. I think what we learned today is that we never go back to normal, or we go to the status of never normal, always changing. Like Peter Hinson wrote a beautiful book about it. You probably have read it.
Yeah.
He had a very nice talk, also talking about this Apple Chapel he has. Let's not talk about Apple and their products for now. Thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure.
One of the biggest game changers has spoken to you, and I hope you take a lot from him back to us in class as become an expert in this change, and also challenge us as a school in changing towards a better future.
It's your time, and I hope that I become old-fashioned in 10 years from now, and let's say that you overrun me. I see that with my own daughter. She's doing her PhD next week on social innovation. She's 27 years only, and she's way ahead of me when I was at that age. And there's so much brightness here, there's so much knowledge, there's so much inspiration that that gives me hope already. So I'm willing to come back. I hope you are inspired, you have inspired me as well. And I put it in your hands, okay? So if I come back in 2 years from now, this school has become sustainable at the top level, and I'm willing to advise you. We have a kind of a deal there in the back.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.